Clive for the introduction, and also great to see so many of you joining the session today. As Clive mentioned, I'll be providing a whistle-stop tour, shall we say, of technology, innovation and sustainability, largely focusing on the environmental angle and also looking at it from kind of a business perspective specifically. But I did also want to note, and again, Clive, I think you pointed to this at the beginning, that we will be considering kind of social aspects of sustainability as well as the role of governments here too. So first, taking a look at the business imperative of technology and sustainability. So as I'm sure we're all aware, technological innovations are creating not only new industries, but they're also disrupting existing ones. And in parallel, we're seeing society needing to urgently adapt to the challenges posed by climate change and other environmental issues. So digging a little deeper into both of these two and looking at sustainability first. The world has 10 years to halve global greenhouse gas emissions and avoid global warming of above 1.5 degrees. So putting this into perspective, this means that we have just over 2 business cycles to transform every sector of the global economy if we are to reach this goal. And as a result of this, sustainability is being increasingly demanded by regulators, investors and customers alike. And so the days of sustainability being a nice to have, as it were, are kind of over. So what are the driving forces that we're seeing behind this change? What do they look like? First, we have regulatory demand, specifically in the context of kind of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. We're seeing accelerating momentum for net zero targets globally, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. And there's increasing regulatory pressure as a result of this being placed on corporates. So we have over 130 countries which have pledged net zero targets, and all sectors will need to significantly ramp up their decarbonisation efforts to meet these goals. And we're already seeing from these targets, there's kind of sector level guidance and policy that's beginning to flow down, such as policies around subsidy reforms, taxations, mandatory reporting on things such as ESG and climate risk, and so on and so forth. We're also seeing a shift in investment priorities. So the world's biggest investors are putting ESG at the forefront of their approach to investment, with almost 50% of global assets under management being held by investors that have pledged to drive climate action through portfolio decarbonisation and low carbon investments. And then thirdly, consumer demand. So consumers are increasingly demanding environmentally and socially friendly products, with 73% globally saying that they change their consumption habits in order to reduce their environmental impact. So this specifically is putting companies in a position where they essentially risk losing custom if they don't act in this space and they don't kind of pivot towards more sustainable products and practices. So how about the business imperative for tech? So with COVID-19 putting digital transformations essentially on hyperdrive, it's now almost impossible for us to imagine companies operating without technology being central to how they do so in the ways that they work. And in fact, even before COVID, organizations collectively, globally, spent over $3 trillion in tech investment year on year in the 3 years leading up to the pandemic. So kind of already, not just in the past year, but this has been a kind of a trajectory that we've seen. So again, the driving factors behind this. So one, enhancing the customer experience. So tech itself is a key enabler to kind of fast, accessible, trackable, on-demand service that many customers are nowadays demanding. And those that are kind of slow movers may be unable to leverage technology to deliver this. They may likely find themselves on the back foot. And beyond this, there's also a range of new tech products and markets opening up and emerging, such as wearables, virtual reality, drones, and so on. We also then have improving productivity and efficiency. So there's massive potential here for technologies such as big data, AI, analytics, robotics to identify efficiencies and enhance productivity. So this can be things such as analysing data sets in shorter times or using machines to automate repetitive tasks perhaps. And adopting technologies in such areas will likely accelerate production rates and essentially enable businesses to produce more for less. And thirdly, adaptability and resilience. So again, we saw this firsthand, how digitally and technologically enabled businesses were able to pivot at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And tech was playing a huge role here, not only internally to businesses, so with the shift from office to home working, but also in developing new offerings in response to the pandemic. And then kind of looking longer term, we have technologies such as bringing together artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, sensors, satellite monitoring. They also have a role to play in monitoring supply chains on a more ongoing basis to be able to predict future disruptions and enable advanced responses and kind of enhance resilience in that sense. So there are a number of other driving forces that I could mention here, but I guess the key message is that there are a range of push and pull factors for both tech transformation and also the move towards sustainability. So now, bringing the two of these powerful trends together, what does the intersection of technology and sustainability look like? So this new wave of transformative technology means that there's a massive opportunity to deliver solutions for social and environmental challenges in ways that we never really could have imagined before and simply weren't possible. So you may be aware of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So these are a set of 17 goals that have been set to enhance global sustainable and inclusive development by the year 2030. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because we did some research with the World Economic Forum early last year, which shows that 70% of the 169 indicators that lie beneath the SDGs can be enabled by emerging technologies. So it's not surprising that there's great examples of the potential for tech for good. And these are increasingly coming to the fore and becoming more aware of them. So there are such as those to reduce hunger, those to protect against biodiversity loss, combating inequality, improving access to and quality of education, providing healthcare, and also for the environment, preventing ocean damage. Now, that's to name but a few, and I could go on about this for ages, so I guess I'll just jump into a few specific use cases here in terms of what these look like in practice. So one example is decentralized energy grids. So typically centralized utility systems, they can often struggle to do things such as matching supply and demand, and they're prone to kind of single points of failure or can suffer from distribution losses and leakages across the network. So here we're seeing technologies such as blockchain, along with artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, initiating a transition towards more decentralized utility systems that can tackle a number of these problems. So such platforms can perhaps collect distributed data on resources such as household level water and energy use data by using smart sensors. And in turn, they can analyze and use this data to facilitate peer-to-peer transactions, dynamic pricing, and kind of optimal demand and supply balancing, which would help make systems more efficient, more cost effective, and resilient in the long run. So one example of this, just to pop one in there, is Sun Contract. So Sun Contract uses a similar approach to this, matching the supply and demand of solar generated electricity, specifically using AI and micro transitions, so kind of P2P business there. And secondly, transparent supply chain. So again, another one here referencing blockchain. So blockchain platforms are being increasingly used to record transactions using supply chain data and enabling kind of full traceability of provenance, so the origin of products, offering the potential of traceability from kind of source to store, or kind of the kind of cradle to grave, as we call it. So this can build confidence in compliant operations, it can expose unethical market activities, perhaps mitigate safety problems, and improve monitoring, verification, and reporting kind of across the whole supply chain. Again, a quick example here is Cobalt blockchain, based in the DRC, so the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is developing a platform that traces mineral provenance from its source, and it allows for identification of malpractice within the supply chain and kind of supports downstream manufacturers and buyers to ensure ethical sourcing of the raw material. So whilst it's great to see the potential that these technologies bring in terms of opportunities, there's also a number of potentially negative unintended consequences. And without proper safeguards, even well-meaning applications can and do lead to negative outcomes. So firstly, I'm sure a number of you might have been thinking this when I was talking about blockchain. We have Bitcoin here. It accounts for the vast majority of energy consumption from cryptocurrency, so well over 90%. And this blockchain itself consumes at least the same amount of energy per year globally as Argentina, which is obviously a massive amount. And also important to note here that this is largely from fossil fuels, not renewable energies yet. Second on the screen, so whilst there's well-developed AI solutions that can reduce perhaps gender bias in access to finance, we have seen instances where bias is actually built into the data, which is used to train these AI systems, which can actually result in these biases feeding through to the machine-generated outputs and having potentially the opposite impact as intended. Even renewable technologies such as wind farms, whilst they've contributed to decarbonising energy generation, they have had unintended impacts on biodiversity, And finally, smart cities is another example. Although they have the potential to improve the quality of life and economic productivity within cities, they also introduce a host of data privacy and cybersecurity risks. So you can kind of see we are standing at a critical junction here where we have the opportunity to put these technologies to work in a responsible way to help us achieve the much needed sustainable outcomes that we're looking for. But with these challenges, there is a careful balance to be struck. So how should we be taking action? So it's clear that there's a gear shift urgently needed to achieve these sustainable goals towards the active management and harnessing of technology for environment and society. So what I'm now going to do is kind of run through 8 key enabling areas that we identified again with our work with the World Economic Forum as crucial to really unlocking and accelerating the potential of tech for good. So firstly, we have responsible technology governance. So whilst it's clear that there is huge potential for tech to drive progress on sustainability, as we know, as we've seen, guardrails for technologies are becoming ever more critical. And this is particularly important given its pervasive nature and the growing scale of impact. So there's a clear and growing need here to develop kind of ethical and responsible technology practices to tackle these risks. And the aim here isn't to slow down innovation, but it's rather to kind of future-proof it by developing those sound risk management processes and business leadership, both within and between organisations. Leadership as well from the tech sector specifically has a critical role to play in galvanising around the global challenges I've mentioned. So think the climate emergency, nature loss, inequality, and here leadership-led kind of coalitions of the willing can really help to rally peers and build momentum around bold commitments. So kind of it's back to Clive, what we were talking about on the poll, that's taking that step from strategy and vision towards actually implementing and kind of making that change. And then there's also a role here for those kind of coalitions to build consensus on frameworks and standards. Alongside this form of leadership, and I kind of touched on it there, there's a fundamental need for kind of more collective and collaborative action across public, private and civil society sectors. And I think, again, specific to the tech sector, this is particularly important, given that the tech sector does tend to be more fragmented than most when it comes to trade associations and initiatives for collaboration, given the competitive nature there. From the government angle, more specifically, there is a need kind of in terms of the enabling environment for balanced fit for purpose technology policy and regulation. So really pulling these together in a framework that's agile, coherent and cross-cutting across industries and sectors. This is particularly pressing today as kind of the rapid growth that we've seen with digital technology. It's progressed for several decades with remarkably little regulation or even self-regulation to a certain extent. So a need to ramp up the policy and regulation there. Finance mechanisms, including say innovation finance, public procurement, infrastructure investment. So these can really be a positive force in kind of stimulating new market solutions, kind of allowing them to happen. And by staying on top of the latest technology trends, government, public finance institutions, companies and investors themselves can kind of back and help scale new technology solutions that may not be possible otherwise, and kind of support with that leapfrogging of traditional systems. So having the kind of the capital, the kind of collaboration, leadership, commitment, we then need to kind of think about having that clear R&D agenda that needs to be set out. So one where breakthrough innovation is central to tackling the priority and the toughest sustainability challenges. Kind of having this clear agenda will help streamline the development and deployment of data, tools, talent, finance, and other resources towards these challenges, really shaping the investment frameworks and helping to build kind of longer term fit for purpose solutions. And particularly given the global nature of these challenges, there is a need where possible for kind of collaborative R&D agendas to be agreed and prioritised at global cross-industry levels. Data, so kind of has underlined a number of the pieces that I've talked about over the last 10 to 15 minutes. It's a key enabler of many of these technological applications, but there is, however, a distinct lack of kind of business incentives or models that encourage sharing of kind of vast amounts of data, whether these are held by public or private organisations. So here we see a real need for new models of data collaboration or even data democratisation to kind of enable across the board here. And last but not least, skills. So to realise this potential of technology for sustainability, essentially, we need the people that can understand it and deliver it. So we need to build that understanding around the real world scenario, so the actual context that we're operating in, the environment and sustainability, the regulatory affairs and the risk management, as well as kind of what what expectations are held by kind of public and government sector representatives, and this can be things from ethics and human rights. So here we're thinking kind of upskilling and reskilling of the existing workforce, as well as the kind of conscious and future-proofed upskilling of upcoming workforces. Finally, to wrap up, I did want to quickly touch on what technology and sustainability means at PwC. So our work broadly falls across 3 areas. So the first being insight development, largely around researching and analysing the impact of technology on both people and the planet. This can range from economic growth and jobs to greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity and other environmental impacts. And there's a focus here on kind of both the challenges and opportunities. The second being strategy advisory services, so helping companies to develop and deploy tech for good strategies and programs with a particular focus on sustainability and climate change, given the nature of our team. So this is where things like climate tech would come in. And thirdly, policy advisory services, so working with governments and other public sector organisations and international organisations to manage the opportunities presented by tech, including helping them kind of develop and navigate new regulatory environments. So there we go. I promised you a whistle-stop tour, and I think that's what you got there. So I popped my email on the slide if you do want to reach out with any questions afterwards. But otherwise, Clive, I will hand back over to you for a quick Q&A, I believe.